Chapter 1. The Door. 3. This is the number of your fate. 3. Yes, 3 is mystic. 3 sends the heart of the mantra. Which 3? The first is dark-haired. He stands on the brink of robbery and murder. A demon has infested him. The name of the demon is Heroin. Which demon is that? I know it not, even from nursery stories. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The voice of the oracle, star-slut, whore of the winds, both were gone. He saw a card fluttering down from nowhere to nowhere, turning and turning in the lazy dark. On it, a baboon grinned from over the shoulder of a young man with dark hair. Its disturbingly human fingers were buried so deeply in the young man's neck that their tips had disappeared in flesh. Looking more closely, the gunslinger saw the baboon held a whip in one of those clutching, strangling hands. The face of the ridden man seemed to writhe in wordless terror. The prisoner, the man in black, who had once been the man the gunslinger trusted, a man named Walter, whispered chummily, "A trifle upsetting, isn't he? A trifle upsetting. A trifle upsetting. A trifle..." The gunslinger snapped awake, waving at something with his mutilated hand, sure that in a moment one of the monstrous shelled things from the western sea would drop on him, desperately inquiring in its foreign tongue as it pulled its face off his skull. Instead of a seabird, attracted by the glister of the morning sun on the buttons of his shirt, wheeled away with a frightened squawk. Roland sat up. His hand throbbed wretchedly, endlessly. His right foot did the same. Both fingers and toe continued to insist they were there. The bottom half of his shirt was gone. What was left resembled a ragged vest. He had used one piece to bind his hand, the other to bind his foot. "Go away," he told the absent parts of his body. "You are ghosts now. Go away." It helped a little. Not much, but a little. They were ghosts, all right, but lively ghosts. The gunslinger ate jerky. His mouth wanted it little, his stomach less, but he insisted. When it was inside of him, he felt a little stronger. There was not much left, though. He was nearly up against it. Yet things needed to be done. He rose unsteadily to his feet and looked about. Birds swooped and dived, but the world seemed to belong to only him and them. The monstrosities were gone. Perhaps they were nocturnal, perhaps tidal. At the moment it seemed to make no difference. The sea was enormous, meeting the horizon at a misty blue point that was impossible to determine. For a long moment the gunslinger forgot his agony in its contemplation. He had never seen such a body of water, had heard of its children's stories, of course, had even been assured by his teachers, some at least, that it existed. But to actually see it, this immensity, this amazement of water after years of arid land, was difficult to accept, difficult to even see. He looked at it for a long time, enwrapt, making himself see it, temporarily forgetting his pain and wonder. But it was morning, and there were still things to be done. He felt for the jawbone in his back pocket, careful to lead with the palm of his right hand, not wanting to stub his fingers to encounter it if it was still there, changing the hand's ceaseless sobbing to screams. It was. All right. Next. He clumsily unbuckled his gun belts and laid them on a sunny rock. He removed the guns, swung the chambers out, and removed the useless shells. He threw them away. A bird settled on the bright gleam tossed back by one of them, picked it up in its beak, then dropped it and flew away. The guns themselves must be tended to, should have been tended to before this, but since no gun in this world or any other was more than a club without ammunition, he laid the gun belts themselves over his lap before doing anything else and carefully ran his left hand over the leather. Each of them was damp from buckle and clasp to the point where the belts would cross his hips From that point they seemed to dry. He carefully removed each shell from the dry portions of the belts. His right hand kept trying to do this job, insisted on forgetting its reduction in spite of the pain, and he found himself returning it to his knee again and again, like a dog too stupid or fractious to heal. In his distracted pain, he came close to swatting it once or twice. I see serious problems ahead, he thought again. He put these shells, hopefully still good, in a pile that was dishearteningly small. 20. Of those, a few would almost certainly misfire. He could depend on none of them. He removed the rest and put them in another pile. 37. Well, you weren't heavy loaded anyway, he thought. But he recognized the difference between 57 live rounds and what might be 20, or 10, or 5, or 1, or none. He put the dubious shells in a second pile. He still had his purse. That was one thing. He put it in his lap and then slowly disassembled his guns and performed the ritual of cleaning. By the time he was finished, 2 hours had passed and his pain was so intense his head reeled with it. Conscious thought had become difficult. He wanted to sleep. He had never wanted that more in his life. But in the service of duty, there was never any acceptable reason for denial. Court, he said in a voice that he couldn't recognize, and laughed dryly. Slowly, he reassembled his revolvers and loaded them with the shells he presumed to be dry. When the job was done, he held the one made for his left hand, cocked it, and then slowly lowered the hammer again. He wanted to know, wanted to know if there would be a satisfying report when he squeezed the trigger or only another of those useless clicks. But a click would be nothing, and a report would only reduce 20 to 19, or 9, or 3, or none. He tore away another piece of his shirt, put the other shells, the ones which had been wetted, in it, and tied it, using his left hand and his teeth. He put them in his purse. Sleep, his body demanded. Sleep, you must sleep now, before dark. There's nothing left. You're used up. He tottered to his feet and looked up and down the deserted strand. It was the color of an undergarment which has gone a long time without washing, littered with seashells which had no color. Here and there large rocks protruded from the gross-grained sand, and these were covered with guano, the older layers the yellow of the ancient teeth, the fresher splotches white. The high tide line was marked with drying kelp. He could see pieces of his right boot and his water skins lying near that line. He thought it almost a miracle the skins hadn't been washed out to sea by high surging waves. Walking slowly, limping exquisitely, the gunslinger made his way to where they were. He picked up one of them and shook it by his ear. The other was empty. This one still had a little water left in it. Most would not have been able to tell the difference between the two, but the gunslinger knew each just as well as a mother knows which of her identical twins is which. He had been traveling with these waterskins for a long, long time. Water sloshed inside. That was good. A gift. Either the creature which had attacked him or any of the others could have torn this or the other open with one casual bite or slice of claw, but none had, and the tide had spared it. Of the creature itself there was no sign, though the two of them had finished far above the tide line. Perhaps other predators had taken it. Perhaps its own kind had given it a burial at sea, as the elephants, giant creatures of whom he had heard in childhood stories, were reputed to bury their own dead. Shash! He lifted the water skin with his left elbow, drank deeply, and felt some strength come back into him. The right boot was of course ruined, but then he felt a spark of hope. The foot itself was intact, scarred but intact, and it might be possible to cut the other down to match it, to make something which would last at least a while. Faintness stole over him. He fought it, but his knees unhinged, and he sat down, stupidly biting his tongue. You won't fall unconscious, he told himself brutally. Not here. Not where another of those things can come back tonight and finish the job. So he got to his feet and tied the empty skin about his waist. But he had only gone 20 yards back toward the place where he had left his guns and purse when he fell down again, half fainting. He lay there a while, one cheek pressed against the sand, the edge of a seashell biting against the edge of his jaw almost deep enough to draw blood. He managed to drink from the water skin, and then he crawled back to the place where he had awakened. There was a Joshua tree 20 yards up the slope. It was stunted, but would offer at least some shade. Goddamn. To Roland, the 20 yards looked like 20 miles. Nonetheless, he laboriously pushed what remained of his possessions into the little puddle of shade. He lay there with his head in the grass, already fading toward what could be sleep or unconsciousness or death. He looked into the sky and tried to judge the time. Not noon, but the size of the puddle of shade in which he rested, said noon was close. He held on a moment longer, turning his right arm over and bringing it close to his eyes, looking for the telltale red lines of infection, of some poison seeping steadily toward the middle of him. The palm of his hand was a dull red, not a good sign. I jerk off left-handed, he thought. At least that's something. Then darkness took him, and he slept for the next 16 hours with the sound of the western sea pounding ceaselessly in his dreaming ears. When the gunslinger awoke again, the sea was dark, but there was a faint light in the sky to the east. Morning was on its way. He sat up, and waves of dizziness almost overcame him. He bent his head and waited. When the faintness had passed, he looked at his hand. It was infected, all right. A telltale red swelling that spread up the palm into the wrist. It stopped there, but already he could see the faint beginnings of other red lines, which would lead eventually to his heart and kill him. He felt hot, feverish. I need medicine, he thought, but there is no medicine here. Had he come this far just to die, then? He would not. And if he were to die in spite of his determination, he would die on his way to the tower. Shut up! Aw, are you serious? Son of a bitch. Recorded that whole thing and didn't even hit record.